thank you everybody for coming out. I am not surprised that we didn't draw as big a crowd tonight to talk about cancer as was here last month for medical cannabis. I was here to hear Jude Thilman's presentation, and of course that had the house pretty full. But cancer is not anybody's favorite subject, is it? But it's going to touch all of our lives, and it probably has already touched some of yours. I speak to groups, service clubs, and gatherings like this all the time, and I always try to begin and end with a spirit of hope. I like to tell people about all the advances that have happened in cancer treatment and cancer screening, and I love the hopeful nature of medicine and science making these huge advances. But at the same time, I never want to trivialize the struggle that cancer is for anybody. And most of you here tonight probably are here because you have someone in your life who has faced cancer, or maybe you face cancer yourself. And for anyone who has cancer in their life, science is not moving fast enough. When I was a little girl in the middle 1970s, my best friend's grandmother was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that was really my first experience about hearing about anybody who had cancer. And back then, a woman diagnosed with breast cancer in the middle of 1970s had about a 75% chance of surviving 5 years. And that same diagnosis today, a woman has about a 90% chance of surviving. So things have gotten better. That percentage between 75 and 90% was kind of a gallop. But what I've heard Dr. Wong down in Ukiah say is that closing that final gap to where everyone can be cured from any particular kind of cancer is very difficult. It's easier to make that easy distance up. Screening's getting better, treatment's getting better. We'll talk more about that. So we're closing the gap, but that final distance is turning out to be really tough. The Cancer Resource Centers of Mendocino County is a local grassroots nonprofit agency. We're not affiliated with the National American Cancer Society, which there's a little bit of confusion, and some people think, oh, they must be a chapter of the American Cancer Society. We're actually an independent grassroots nonprofit that was started right here in Mendocino County. And it was started in 1995. And we're here to provide information, support, and advocacy for anyone facing cancer in Mendocino County. Our mission is to improve the quality of life of anyone facing cancer in Mendocino County, and our vision is that no one will face cancer alone. We have 2 offices. Our coast office is located on Calpella Street in Mendocino. I was just there today. And our Ukiah office is on Dora Street in Ukiah. Now, Mendocino County is really big, so that's why we have 2 offices, but it's kind of interesting that the first office of the Cancer Resource Center was located in Mendocino. The Cancer Resource Center was started by Sarah O'Donnell, who lived in Comchy. She still does. She was the director for the first 21 years before I came along, and I'm only the second director in the 23-year span of history of the Cancer Resource Center. This Ukiah office, interestingly, only opened in 2003. And you would think that, there's a great need there. There is a great need there because the base of the population, the mass of people really is in Ukiah. But that office opened in 2003, actually almost 10 years after the Cancer Resource Center got its start. Some people forget how big Mendocino County is. My son Tim, who's a map maker, made me this representation, and it's to scale to show how big Mendocino County really is. And there are not very many people here. So we have 3,900 square miles, but only 88,000 people. Mendocino County is bigger than our smallest state, Rhode Island. It's also bigger than our second smallest state, which is Delaware. So when we talk about having cancer in Mendocino County, it's a little different than having cancer in some other places. If you live in Covelo or Albion or Point Arena and you need to get to cancer care, you have some driving to do. That's good if you've got a supportive partner or friend or relative who's got a great car and is willing to drive you. But if you don't have a great car, if you've got bald tires or maybe a clunky old car and maybe nobody to drive you, and you need to go every day to Dr. Joseph's office in Ukiah for a radiation treatment, it's not so great. So we're here to help, and a lot of the problems we're trying to solve are transportation and lodging related problems for people who live in these outlying areas but need to get to care. So I want to back up a little bit for a moment and talk about what is cancer. Cancer is cells going haywire. Most of us know that cancer is cells growing out of control. It could be anywhere in the body, and they could be for any reason. Sometimes there's just a mutation, sometimes it's wear and tear, it's age, it's exposure to environmental chemicals. A lot of different things result in a cancer growing. This chart shows, you can just take a minute to look at it, but the most prevalent types of cancer in men and women, and that cancer is the second leading cause of death in the United States and California after heart disease. What scientists are finding out as they study cancer in more and more specificity is that what we call colon cancer or what we call some other type of cancer is really not just that one type of cancer. It's a collection of rare cancers. And the key and the advances in treatment have occurred because scientists are making more progress at understanding how each tumor is different and how to block off whatever it is that that cancer needs to grow. So this is one of the most important discoveries, is that common cancers are now considered really a collection of rare cancers. At the Cancer Resource Center, we see men and women, people with all different types of cancer, but we keep statistics on the people we see, and they very closely reflect the cancer prevalence in the United States as a whole. We're not unique or different in Mendocino County. About a third of our total clients that we see are breast cancer clients, and then behind that is lung cancer. And if you look at cancer types by prevalence in the United States, it'll look pretty much like this. We see at the Cancer Resource Center over 400 clients a year, and about 260 of those clients are newly diagnosed with cancer. And there are about between 400 and 500 people diagnosed with cancer every year in Mendocino County. So in terms of our reach, we see probably the majority of people newly diagnosed with cancer in Mendocino County. That's pretty good. But I'd like to spread the word more, especially getting people referred to us for our help even before they've seen an oncologist, because we can really do a lot of good to help people early on, and I'll explain that more in a little bit. So here's the good news. Cancer survival rates for all cancers combined have been improving since 1975. If you just take a moment and think about someone you know in your life who's had cancer, and it was years ago, they are surviving indefinitely beyond their cancer diagnosis, and that is really great news. The population of people in the United States who have survived cancer is growing. Cancer is no longer anything like a death sentence. So this is good news, but it also changes our work at the Cancer Resource Center, because we need to broaden our focus to not just dealing with newly diagnosed clients and people coming to us with cancer, but supporting the growing community of people who are living many years beyond a cancer diagnosis, and supporting their needs for active surveillance and making sure that they are getting the follow-up tests and screening that they need and the basic primary care so that they can continue to be healthy and monitored for cancer for any kind of return. This slide, I have to give credit to Dr. Hengbing Wang in Ukiah. He's the medical oncologist for Adventist Health Ukiah Valley, and this is a slide I took out of one of his presentations. It's called Progress by Many Measures. In addition to just treating cancer better so that people survive more often, there are other improvements in cancer treatment. For instance, there are less invasive screening methods, especially that are under development right now. I was just reading this article. This is a magazine that comes to the Cancer Resource Center, and we have lots of issues of these, many years of issues of these with different articles, and they're all free if you come into our lending library. This one has an article in it about liquid biopsies, and that's another thing I'm really hopeful about. Liquid biopsies, what that means. Instead of a biopsy of tissue of a cancerous tumor, in the future, we think that doctors, clinicians will be able to diagnose cancer from a blood test, because cancerous tumors often give off proteins and DNA and fragments that can be analyzed, and the science is getting better about being able to do a blood test and analyze it carefully and decide, early screening to show maybe this person has cancer, maybe we should look more closely. And that's an exciting development. So that's another advance. And then treatments that are less toxic. Back in the old days, the early days of chemotherapy, cancer doctors threw everything but the kitchen sink at some cancer patients trying to kill that cancer, trying to cure that patient. And some of the early treatments were just extremely difficult to tolerate, extremely toxic. But what's going on now is through testing and trials, scientists are learning that, we can do just as good a job at killing this cancer without bombarding the patient with so much. We can give less of something that works, and that's an advance. And then other advances, palliative care treatments, late effects identified, surveillance strategies established. If someone is well beyond their cancer treatment, they finished, how often should they be screened? We're learning more about this every day. And then also on the chart, vaccines. The HPV vaccine is new since about 2006. And it has the potential to basically cure HPV-related cancers, and that's another area that I'm very hopeful about. So I'm going to switch gears now. We've learned a little bit about cancer, and I want to just back up and say, I'm not a medical professional, and no one on our staff actually is a medical professional. We have a staff of lay patient navigators, and they have different experiences. Some of them come from a social services background. 50% of our 4 patient navigators are themselves cancer survivors. One of them is someone whose husband has had a very serious cancer diagnosis in his past. So our patient navigators are very experienced in the field of cancer, even though none of us are clinical professionals. Our core service is patient navigation, and what that is, we call it CPRS, Consultation Planning, Recording, and Summarizing. So I'm going to just take that step by step right now. Consultation planning is early in someone's cancer diagnosis, meeting with them, interviewing them to get on a piece of paper their questions and concerns, which we then take with them to the doctor, to the oncologist visit, and we provide that oncologist with this list of questions and concerns, and the doctors love it because they have a plan in front of them showing, okay, this cancer patient has 3 really good questions that they can read in advance and prepare to answer. This cancer patient has a really important family wedding this summer that it's more important than anything else in their life right now that they are well enough to attend that wedding. This cancer patient has really great family support, but is, going to need some. So what I'm saying is that having the questions and concerns on a piece of paper ahead of time really reduces anxiety. And the way that we know that is because our Cancer Research Center was involved in pretty extensive research in the 2000s, 2004, 5, 6, and 2010. 4 different participatory research projects with UCSF on the benefits of consultation planning and on certain aspects of patient navigation. And this research was done with the prior director, Sarah O'Donnell, and close work with UCSF, and it was funded by the California Breast Cancer Research Project. And so all of the clients studied in these particular studies were women with breast cancer. But what the studies showed, a couple things. One of them is the benefit of consultation planning. That when a newly diagnosed breast cancer patient sat down with a patient navigator ahead of their first appointment and were able to just talk out their greatest concerns and get them on paper and know that the patient navigator would go with them to the oncology appointment to take notes, there was a great release of anxiety, there was an assurance, there was a certain confidence. And also, these women were more involved in their own care. They were more able to speak up for themselves, to ask the questions directly to the doctor. Because we work with people sometimes who some people avoid doctors. They avoid doctors until they have cancer, and then they can't avoid doctors anymore. Some people don't really understand that they're allowed to ask a question of the doctor. So we're able to coach them and work with them so that they have a really good plan before going to the doctor, and that's a huge benefit to clients. This is my little chicken, Fluffy. She lives out on Mirror Mill Road now. And the little silkies, they're really known for brooding. They will sit on there. As soon as they lay a few eggs, they want to sit. So I thought this was a good slide. I used some slides from my phone to illustrate my presentations. And she was really, really full of anxiety. But research shows that the consultation plan reduces anxiety. And this is just a picture showing Sarah O'Donnell and some of the people involved in the UCSF research. Most of these studies are published. If you're interested, I can get them to you. So the consultation planning I've covered pretty well, and after that comes consultation recording. We actually go to doctor's visits with patients and take a little digital recorder and sit in the corner of the room. We take notes, very detailed notes. I was a medical transcriptionist for 10 or 15 years, so my notes are super detailed. And then we have the audio recording, which we use to burn a CD, so that what the client gets out of this is they have a CD audio recording of the visit, so some weeks down the road they can listen again and if they felt like they missed something. And then we take our recording and our notes that we've taken carefully and write up a couple-page summary of that visit, the important things, the information about the diagnosis, the treatments that are being recommended, the chemotherapy regimens that are being recommended, if any, the next steps. Sometimes the oncologist will say, you need to do this. You need to go to Santa Rosa, get a PET scan. You need to get some blood work. You need to get an ultrasound, needle biopsy, blah, blah, blah. And you know what? People absorb about 15% of what they're being told at their oncology visit because it's overwhelming. Some people are getting very bad news. I've been in the room when some people got some very bad news, and it was humbling. But I was there taking notes, and I'd like to think that the gift of the Cancer Resource Center to some people is that they don't have to worry about capturing what's being said. We're going to do that for them. They can just emotionally do what they need to do. Some people get mad at the doctor, and doctors are pretty gracious. It's like, this is I hear what you're saying, and now I'm going to tell you what we're going to do together. So we're there to record and take notes and create a visit summary. And that's the consultation recording and summarizing part of our work. Some patients we go to lots of visits with. Some people come to the Cancer Resource Center and check out a book, and that's fine too. There's a spectrum of help that people want and need. Some people need a lot of help just day to day. Some people need emotional help. There are clients that we talk to just about every week because they need somebody to talk to. And there's the clients that, check out a book. Maybe they come to a support group. Maybe we go to their first visit, but maybe not many follow-up visits. We're there as long as people need us. We do provide some other services. We have hats, wigs, scarves, bras, and prosthetics for free for people who have lost their hair, need those things. We're able to provide some modest financial help for people. We can't meet every need by any means. And sadly, some cancers are better funded than others. We have funds. Somebody has leukemia, we can probably help you out. If somebody has some other rare cancer, and we'll do what we can. We have support groups that meet throughout the county. We have a men's group and a women's group that meet in Ukiah at the Cancer Resource Center on Dora. They meet twice a month. They're professionally facilitated. We have an LCSW for each of those groups. And then on the coast, we have a men and women's co-ed group, and then we have a men's group on the coast as well. So last year, 2017, we had over 200 separate meetings of cancer support groups. bringing cancer patients together in a support group is a really efficient way to emotionally support them because they're supporting each other. Relationships form, they leave the group, maybe they become friends. One of the things we also do, peer matching. We have a library full of resources to check out, but sometimes what people want is to have an experience explained. We have a man who's very supportive of, associated with the Cancer Resource Center, who was a colorectal cancer patient at a young age, and he's living the rest of his life with a colostomy, and he's otherwise completely healthy. So it's a happy story. But when we've had some other patients come along with a colon cancer diagnosis, and they were facing a surgery like that, they have been scared to death. What does this mean for my life? I don't know if I can do this. We put these two people together, and the man who is living happily and well and thriving with the colostomy is able to tell this terrified person, this is what it's like. What do you want to know? Ask me anything. And I think that's another gift of the Cancer Resource Center. We put people together to share their experiences. This is just a little picture of our boutique in our Ukiah office. We change out the hats kind of seasonally, and we take our woolly winter caps and trade those out. This is a picture of our resource lending library in Ukiah. And Sarah O'Donnell, again, who is the founder of the Cancer Resource Center, she said, when you're first diagnosed, it's like being in cancer kindergarten. She started the Cancer Resource Center because when she was diagnosed in about the early 1990s at some point, she lived in Comcast, 25 miles from town and off the grid with 3 little boys at home. And she just wanted to go someplace and get a lot of information and have somebody tell her, what to do, what do I do next? And she didn't find the right place in Mendocino County at that time, so she started it. And we're here all these years later. Nancy Johnson, who's one of our longest serving patient navigators, she said she had a big awakening when she started this work. It's one thing to help people who have support systems and health insurance, but many patients have neither. Their cancer diagnosis is secondary to mental illness, poverty, or homelessness. People are differently equipped to deal with cancer. Some people have a really great support system, and some people basically have no support. So we're there to do what we can. We have some guiding values and principles, and one of them is equity, which is that anyone diagnosed with cancer deserves to be treated. It shouldn't be, because you're poor or don't have health insurance or you don't have a driver, for instance, that shouldn't mean that your cancer can't be treated. And then access to information is another of our core values. We believe that people have a right to know the truth about their diagnosis, and they have the right to learn whatever more they need to know to make the choices about their treatment. So access to information is another important value. Self-determination. We all as adults have the right to choose how we will be treated, what medical treatments we will accept, which we won't, where we are in our life, and that's just basic human dignity of self-determination. And then finally, harm reduction. We do what we can to advocate for a clean environment, for less cancer, for eating better, for less toxics. Back in 2000, the Cancer Resource Center was a participant in getting toxic weed control pesticides and herbicides to stop using those at the schools because children should not be exposed to these things, and we think that prevention is part of the cure, and having a healthy environment is good for everybody. So that has to do with reducing risk. Is cancer preventable? According to the American Cancer Society, at least 42% of cancers are potentially avoidable. So we've got smoking, unhealthy behaviors, certain cancers caused by infectious agents such as HPV could be prevented through vaccination. So yeah, there's a lot we could do to prevent cancer. And the things are, none of this will shock you. We all know about tobacco and diet. the more reading I do, the more I understand how much weight, being overweight or obese, is a risk for cancer, and I wrestle with that. Alcohol use, this is wine country, and we do have some good support from some wineries. So it's, but it's true, alcohol use is another risk factor. I'm not someone who thinks that anybody should not enjoy life. We can't live our life in fear of cancer and not enjoy life. Eat some ice cream, have a glass of wine, but being aware of what increases our risk, I think, is what's important, and moderation in all things. So out of this list of things, these red things are the ones I want to talk about. I've already talked a little bit about the HPV vaccine. I have 2 boys in their 20s, and the vaccine kind of came along when they were beyond, they didn't have the vaccine, and now they're too old to get it, basically, because it's not as effective in adults. Even they can give it to people in their early 20s, but the effectiveness is reduced. Ideally, it's given to children and teenagers, and I think it takes 3 doses. Human papillomavirus, it is a virus, and it's very common in the population. In fact, the majority of people will have some form of this. There are many different strains of it. There are only a couple strains, I want to say 2, that cause most of cervical cancer. They can also cause other types of cancer, oral cancers in the throat and mouth in men. And if you know somebody who's had an HPV-related cancer in their throat or mouth and lost part of their tongue or part of it, it's tragic. It's life-altering, and it can be prevented. So promotion of the vaccine is a great it's in the interest of public health. Vaccines are a topic that some people get going on. Some people are very suspicious of vaccines. I'm not equipped to have that discussion, and like I said, I'm not a medical professional in any way. So the best source of information about that is your medical provider. But as a public health advocate, I can tell you that a lot of cancers can be prevented through this, and I would advocate for that. Know yourself, your family history, and your risks. About 6% of cancers are hereditary. In other words, they can be traced to your family lineage, to your DNA. We had a good presentation on cancer and genetics last September in Ukiah. And we had a great speaker, Kathleen Mott. She's a cancer geneticist from Santa Rosa, and she counsels people on their genetic history. Really wonderful lady, and she's so knowledgeable. In some families, if you look at the family tree, there is just cancer, 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 and that makes anyone suspicious that something's going on there. And there's progress being made on this, and more cancers are being identified to, where on the DNA can we explain? What explains this? There's a syndrome called Lynch syndrome, which is a genetic and inherited syndrome which predisposes someone toward cancer, different kinds of cancer, but especially colon cancer. And someone with Lynch syndrome has, I've seen different statistics, but it's between a 60% and 80% chance of developing cancer in their lifetime, and it often happens at an early age. So colon cancer before the age of 50, before the normal screening, the colonoscopy starts. So it helps to know your family history, and if you see a lot of cancer in your family or the family of someone you love, it might be worth investigating that and having the genetic testing done. It's a weighted topic, and everybody has to make the decision for themselves about whether they want to do that. But if you want to start screening early and watching for it, if you know that there's a tendency, a predisposition for cancer, that your odds are increased of getting cancer, then you can start screening earlier, and that's something simple to do that could save lives. Knowing yourself. I went to a visit last week with a woman who had ovarian cancer, and she had had symptoms going on for 7 years, and she had been brushed off. Some of her symptoms were being explained as other things. And anyway, knowing your body, knowing that something's different and not ignoring it, not saying, oh, it's probably nothing. just taking that risk of going to the doctor, even though you know he or she is going to say, oh, it's nothing to be concerned about. Check it out. Check it out because you don't know. And then cancer screening tests. There's some good resources on the internet to look for what your recommended cancer screening tests would be, but the best source, of course, is your medical provider. There used to be a very standard recommendation that women get a mammogram every year beginning at 40, and that's kind of changed, and now there's this kind of participatory discussion where we just talk about, well, are you at high risk, and maybe you should have your baseline at a certain age. And then there is an online breast cancer risk tool that you can do that assesses your risk, and you can have a discussion about whether maybe you do need a mammogram every year, or maybe you'd feel better if you had a mammogram every year. But different studies show different things, and there's been some research saying, there's not annual mammograms don't increase the risk of surviving breast cancer. So it's a subject of controversy, and it's something to talk about, and it seems to change. So again, eating healthy. I'm not the best spokesperson for eating healthy, but I know I should eat better. And I think the key is eating more of the good stuff, and that displaces the bad stuff as you go along. And then the one thing I want to say about smoking is some people don't know that smoking causes other kinds of cancer and not just lung cancer. It can cause bladder cancer, esophageal cancer, stomach cancer, in addition to lung cancer. So California has made a lot of great progress since the 1970s, especially in the last 30 years. California has the second lowest rate of smoking in the United States, right behind Utah. So we're doing pretty good on smoking. But we have a new danger, and this is very serious. My husband is the principal of Ukiah High School, and he said, we're finding these little cartridges all over. We're finding these little cartridges all over the school, and they're vaping cartridges. And the danger with vaping, couple things. Well, first of all, some people might not know that vaping is using an electronic cigarette to inhale nicotine vapor that's been aerosolized by a little battery. It's usually a rechargeable battery into the lungs, very similar to smoking, but instead of lighting the cigarette so it's not combustion, it's an electronic aerosolized vapor that goes into your lungs. So most people would think about it for a few minutes and say, that doesn't sound like a good idea. Inhaling nicotine and the chemicals and flavorings that go with it into your lungs doesn't sound like a good idea. And it's not, but the research, because e-cigarettes are still so new, we can't point to research yet and say, it causes cancer in this relationship as to smoking, because cancer can take decades to form. Cancer can take years or decades to form. And so we don't have the statistics right now to look at a 16-year-old and say, that's going to cause cancer. You've increased your risk of cancer. But inhaling these chemicals, so first of all, let's start with the nicotine. The nicotine is more concentrated than in a cigarette. So kids are vaping nicotine and getting very quickly addicted because nicotine is highly addictive. And there's more nicotine in the electronic cigarettes than in a standard cigarette. And there was an article just on Monday in the New York Times, if you want to read it. It was a really good article. And they quoted some kids saying, I just can't stop. Because once they get started, it's very easy to conceal. They can kind of just keep this. Some of them look like a little computer flash drive. So it's not like having a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. It's very easy to conceal. It doesn't create a big plume of smoke, and so they can kind of just take a couple puffs between classes or even during class. And it's a new health threat. And by far, electronic cigarettes have replaced standard cigarettes among the younger generation. They're used in greater numbers. So that's a problem. And how are we going to once you're using? Oh, and one more thing about this, and then I'll move on. I'm kind of on my soapbox. That's why I used my rooster. He's on his soapbox. The other risk here is that once kids use e-cigarettes, they're much more likely to go back and forth. So they're using e-cigs, but then, oh, well, here's just a standard cigarette. It's like, I already know how to do that. And so they go back and forth. So it's an entryway into smoking. There is an electronic cigarette called a Juul, and they're advertising it as a way to stop smoking. But when it comes in, the flavorings in a little vial, it's e-cig fluid, comes in peanut butter cup and cotton candy and tropical punch, with the labels looking very colorful and kid-friendly. We know that it's not a stop smoking device. So I'm just going to wrap up with the last few slides. So the Cancer Resource Center, as I mentioned, is a nonprofit organization. We are on the constant fundraising treadmill. This little girl did a little passive fundraiser for us when she had a lemonade stand and donated her profits to the Cancer Resource Center. So you can always do something like that and help keep us going. So I want to wrap up by recommending 2 books. This book, The Emperor of All Maladies, is a really great book about cancer if you want to learn more. It starts with the earliest human history and what people understood about cancer early on. It's really interesting. There's not a lot in the early human record and historical records about cancer. And the reason is because cancer is much more prevalent in the older people. And way back when, people often didn't live long enough to get cancer. The average age of a new cancer diagnosis in the United States is 66. So even though children do get cancer, it's more common among old people. But this book I recommend is really good. The other book, Being Mortal, I recommend this to everybody. I think every family should have a copy of this book. He's a wonderful writer and storyteller, and he tells great stories about his own family and health challenges that they went through. But the reason every family should have this book and read it is so that you can have the hard discussions ahead of time about what do you want? What do you want when this happens to you? What do you want if you had a health crisis? What would you want for yourself? What is quality of life for you? And it can stimulate a lot of really wonderful discussions. So that's why I recommend that book. Plus, it's just a great read. So I start and end with hope. This little rock was painted by a group of people who paint little rocks and leave them around, and it was left in our garden at the Cancer Resource Center. And it's still there. It just showed up one day, and I see it almost every day, and it just reminds me to maintain hope. So that's the end of my talk, and I would love to have any questions that you have. All right, thanks.
I just wondered, part of what you were talking about sounded a little bit like advocacy, like being the patient's advocate in the examining room, for example. But then part of it sounded like, you're there to record what was actually, communicated to the patient. So my question is, are you there more for that part of it, just being sure that the patient understands everything the doctor said, or do you become the patient's advocate sometimes?
We do. We do sometimes need to advocate for patients, especially when it seems like things are falling through the cracks. Somebody's been referred for a surgical consultation down in San Francisco, and nobody's returning calls. Sometimes we get on the phone and say, hey, explain the situation, it's really urgent or something. So we do that kind of advocacy. At consultations with the oncologists, we're normally just taking notes. We try to just blend in the background and just take really good notes and make that recording. We don't usually ask questions of the doctor unless the patient ahead of time has said, you know what, I'm going to need some help. I'm not comfortable asking my question. Can you help me? Then we will. But that's most people, especially because the questions are all written down on paper that the doctor can see in advance. And we try not to leave that appointment until we see that every question has been answered. So if there's a question there, we think, you know what, doctor, I think that this person was really interested in this, and I didn't really quite hear the answer to that. And so that's a kind of advocacy, yeah.
Back in the beginning, when you were talking about a cancer like the breast cancer, colon cancer, it's not just colon, breast, it's a collection of rare cancers. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm not really qualified to give you much more of a technical explanation, just that there are some advances in understanding more about the genetic makeup of certain cancers and what is driving that cancer. For instance, breast cancer may be thriving and growing in response to estrogen in the body, and they do testing on that. So breast cancer is categorized now into there's like this is just a very layperson explanation. There's estrogen, progesterone, and there's other, So is that cancer, is that breast cancer, is it this kind? Is it growing based on these chemicals? Can we take this away and stop it from growing? And so breast cancer is not just breast cancer. It's categorized into these different kinds, and that determines how it's treated. And there's another test called Oncotype DX, which I don't have a great understanding of it, but that test gives a patient a score, which it's a numerical score, which determines how effective chemotherapy might be in treating that certain cancer. And based on that, some women with breast cancer are now told, chemotherapy is not going to work on this. We know this statistically through trials. You're spared chemotherapy. You're not going to have that, because we know that that's not going to be effective on this type of cancer. And that's new. That's new. It's not treating every breast cancer the same way, with the same, throw the kitchen sink at it with all these cancer drugs. It's getting very specific. And I think that's good progress.
I got the impression that you are very traditional.
Traditional, you mean like Western medicine? Uh-huh.
I was just wondering, do you have any experience with patients who want to try something different?
We do. We have lots of patients because it's Mendocino County. We have lots of patients who want to use alternative medicine either in conjunction with standard medical treatment or by itself. And we do not value judge anybody, or we have no agenda to push. We are just wanting that person to be informed and find out what they want to know, and we're there to support them no matter what they want to do. So yeah, I'm kind of talking about, I go to visits to oncologists, and so I'm hearing that. And most people who have a cancer diagnosis want to pursue treatment in the hope of remission or a cure, and so that's very common. But a lot of people do that in conjunction with other types of medicine, as long as it's not in conflict with that. But we don't have, like I said in the beginning, we're not medically trained people. We're lay people who provide support, information, advocacy. So we don't say, oh, hey, I think it would be good to go try the certain kind of treatment. We never do that. We don't give medical advice or anything like that.
I still would like to ask more. What do you offer them? What is it that you can offer?
Okay, so if someone wanted, for instance, to try acupuncture, we have business cards of different practitioners, or we know some people that we can send people to say, hey, I know somebody who's very knowledgeable about this. If you want to go talk to that person, we can direct them to information. We don't provide it ourselves, but we have business cards and brochures for different people, different practitioners, just like we have business cards for people who provide certain types of aesthetic services to cancer patients for free or reduced costs. We have Yoga Mendocino provides a lot of classes. They actually take cancer patients into certain classes at no charge. So we can provide that kind of referral to people. Like if someone's asking, where do you think I can learn more about this? We can help them with that. Yeah, and I probably didn't emphasize enough throughout the talk that we don't charge for any of our services. There's never a charge for anything we do. We do accept donations. Some people are generous and able to help, and so, when they're able to get beyond the immediate crisis, are able to make a donation, but that we don't charge anything for anybody.
Are you familiar with immunotherapy?
No, I don't know a whole lot about that. I know that it's still pretty early and it's working great for some people.
Dr. Rocha, who's the medical oncologist in Fort Bragg, I was in an appointment with him last week. He said, I don't like it when people say we're waiting to cure cancer, because he says some kinds of cancer we've cured for years. It just depends on what kind. There are some kinds of cancers that are very difficult. They're proving very difficult. And some kinds of cancer, you get that kind of cancer, we know what to do, and your chances are really great. So there's such a difference there. But immunotherapy, it's working on some of those cancers that are really tough, really tough. Yep, Joanne?
If you know, I'm curious what the woman who had ovarian cancer, what was she ignoring?
She was
for that long period.
She was ignoring ascites, which is a buildup of fluid in your belly, because that can be a symptom of alcohol use. And she was dismissed because she was a wine drinker. I don't know how much, but a lot of doctors said, "Oh, it's because you drink," and until it couldn't be ignored anymore. Yeah, so that was not good. Suzanne?
You said in the beginning about the size of our county being so large, and so do you offer transportation services to radiation, et cetera?
Yes and no. We have some volunteer drivers, including we have a great volunteer driver who lives in Laytonville, and he's driven people way far, even to San Francisco. We've got some good volunteer drivers in Ukiah. We can always use more volunteer drivers. Our biggest transportation challenge is getting people over from the coast to Ukiah, especially repeatedly. Radiation treatment is normally Monday through Friday for a period of 5 or 6 weeks. That's because they don't give radiation in one big old blast. They give a little bit of radiation for every day for like 60 treatments. And so when somebody lives in Point Arena and they have to drive over Mountain View Road every day for 6 weeks, it's very, very challenging. We look for lodging for people, and we have the word out, and we've had a tiny bit of success finding people, just generous people, supporters who have a studio or a room and say, you know what, that person can stay with me for 5 or 6 weeks. And usually it's just during the week. Like they can go home to Point Arena on the weekend and they want to. And they're just looking to stay a couple nights a week to just reduce the amount that they're driving every day. So we try to solve those. There's also people with partnership health plan. We can usually arrange a ride medical transport through Hey Taxi or something, because their partnership health plan has a transportation provision that we can get people rides even to San Francisco to see specialists if we know in advance, and if the service is available, and if all the stars are aligned, we can do that. But we love our volunteer drivers, and people who sign up to drive patients, we try to respect how often they want to do that. So if they say, you know what, I'll drive twice a month, we say, okay, we'll ask you twice a month, and not pester you to death. So yeah. But transportation is a problem in Mendocino County, getting people from way up there to, getting people to San Francisco. And then the cost adds up too. People who get cancer, unless you're really financially pretty comfortable, it's going to hurt financially. You've got your copays and your deductibles. And if you're going to the doctor again and again and you've got a copay, even if it's $10 or $20, it's if you go to the doctor 6 times in the next 3 weeks, that's a lot of money. And then the cost of bridge tolls and gas and time off work. It's a financial hardship to get cancer. It really is. We try to help, but we can always use more. We have some what we call angel funds to help people just with odds and ends. We had somebody recently who had a skin cancer removed and needed bandages and for dressing changes, didn't have money in his budget to buy bandages and dressing changes. So we were able to use some funds from the community foundation that we have just for miscellaneous needs, and we were able to buy those things that he needed. So that was a help. I wanted to just acknowledge my helpers here in putting together my my presentation. So, thank you.